we're obviously going to talk about Agile. So I go to conferences a lot and meetups. Actually, a lot of meetups happens here in General Assembly. And there's usually a second slide, and the person tells, how cool they are, what they do. And I always feel like they try to convince me that I should believe them. And for some reason, I should listen to them. So I don't like it, but I still couldn't leave you without second slide. So I thought I should tell why you should not listen to me. It's important because if you think about business processes, the way you implement them, it depends on a lot of things, including like your personality, what team you work with, what company you work with. So, I'm a specific person with my situation, and I do things in a particular way. And I teach you those things, but you need to listen to that in kind of that context and see like how is it applicable to you or to your situation. And what you're about to hear is not necessarily you might apply immediately. Some of those things are applicable right away wherever you are. Some of them may be helpful in very long term where you might be like manager or business owner. Number one, low risk aversion. I risk a lot, and not a lot of people can handle this. This is important. So if you don't like doing this, you should consider like what I teach maybe a little bit over the top, and you have to dial it back. Anti-micromanaging, I trust people a lot, and I let them make mistakes, and it let things to fail. And not every business can actually tolerate this. So depending what company you work, if you work in a company that actually okay with this is great, but not some companies just cannot handle this. And when you let things go, things are gonna break, people are gonna make mistakes, and this is how they learn. And it also saves me tons of time not telling them what to do. At the same time, depending on business you work in, it might not work for you. Like I said, things will break. I don't try to helicopter around people and try to prevent that. This is how people learn. And I do first, then I read manual. And the reason for this is because like if it's not intuitive, it's UX fault. So guys, just do a better job. So. Agile, I would say a little counterintuitive. If you think how you traditionally would do something, you would plan out and then execute. Let's say you think about a car. You can think about a wheel. At some point, you have to think about this, how it's going to look like. At some point, you'll have to think and plan out how the body going to look like, how you're going to put them together, and you plan it all out. Then it goes to factory workers put it all together, and you have car on the market. Maybe a little bit too late for the market. And this is the problem. It's very intuitive, you plan it out, but then it can take you many years and you might miss your opportunity. Agile is not that intuitive what you do first, but what you do is actually this. You don't go for a car, you just do scooter. And this is what you go with to market. Then you analyze what's going on, how sales going, what is feedback for actual users. And you collect this and think, okay, maybe we should do bicycle. And you do bicycle. And you do the same process, you analyze what's going on, how sales going, any kind of market analytics and feedback you collect, you put it into your next product or improvement. And you're like, oh, okay, like people want bikes now. And every time, you don't wait all the years before doing something. You make small increments, and these small increments, you go with them on the market, collect feedback, and keep going. And eventually, you might end up with a car, maybe not. It's not such a big deal. The thing is, every Agile process is very iterative and requires feedback to decide what to do next. And there are lots of principles how to do it. It's easy to say. How to do it is quite counterintuitive, I would say, and there are lots of principles you need to follow to do this successfully. But this picture is like essential to understand what is actually the difference. Surprisingly, a lot of ideas for Agile came from car manufacturing. So, because they wanted to get to market faster. If you want to make a car every year, new car, you need to move really fast. Obviously, software and any technology usually moves faster, but there was like huge need on big factories to do something faster than they were did, which is quite interesting. Another pretty interesting thing about Agile processes, if something fails, you don't spend a lot of time planning. Like if you go with this scenario and your car, like market doesn't want it, something doesn't work, you already spent so much time doing it when you realize something was wrong conceptually. Where here, you realize really fast, and during your next iteration, you can figure out how you can fix it. In the essence, a lot of things is just controlling chaos. You have organization, you have a lot of people, and you basically have to come up with some plan how you're going to organize all those people. You can organize them in different ways. Agile is just a set of different techniques how you can do this. So you always have to have a plan, what you're going to do, but then you have to improvise, because things just don't work how you plan. But it's important to have one. So there are Agile frameworks. They kind of give you a mindset how to deal with this. And when it meets reality, you still have to improvise and figure out what to do. The way you work with this, I talk a lot from perspective of implementing the process, like it would be like business owner or manager or team lead. It's also important to understand how business works, even like if you have like very entry level. Understanding the whole picture, why things done a particular way, how they can be improved, actually can get you very far, even if you're not the person who's responsible of doing this. And that's why a lot of things I teach from perspective of how I see, where like I have to make something that works and let other people do their job. At one point, you might be in that position to do these kind of decisions. That's why this is important. But if you don't, this is how you can understand your management decisions. And usually there are two approaches how you make changes or how you introduce processes and how you tell people what to do. I call it police and marketers. Police is very simple and straightforward. You come up with a rule and you tell people you have to do this, and then you check after them, and if they don't, you punish them or figure out the way how to correct this. It's very straightforward. It's very time demanding. If you ever have to do this, plus most likely you will have other responsibilities, you'll have a big problem with time management. Another thing we know, it's called, why is it clicking that far? Called marketers, right? We all know Apple, and they don't, force you to go in the store. You want to go in their store, and there's a line around the corner to get in. It's much harder to come up. Like you have to come to work and come up with idea what you tell to people so they want to do whatever rule you come up with, which is very tricky. But if you can figure it out, it will save you tons of time. You come up with idea, and people just do it, and you don't have to check what they're doing, how they're doing, because it just works. Again, this is tricky, and also it requires a lot of trust. You have to trust people that they're going to do their job, which you need to think about how much you trust people, match your style. And the only difference, if you're ever in a position where you have to work with people, the very worst thing is not to fail. Fail is okay, failing is totally fine. Like you do something, it might succeed, it might fail. Failure is part of success. The problem is mediocrity. If you're going to be a manager or team lead or like have your business, the worst thing you can do is to not to do anything, to just sit and wait when someone else is going to do it, and it never works. So it's called mediocrity, and if you have ambition, and probably if you ever get like some kind of promotion, you probably do have ambition, like you don't want to be stuck in that. Like failing is totally fine. Like I made a lot of mistakes. never was fired, so it's all right. The interesting thing about good process, it doesn't necessarily give you solution. A lot of people hear like, oh, there's a new thing in software called Agile, and we do things old way, and they're like, oh, okay, let's do Agile. And they don't really know what is this, and they think it's going to solve their problems. It is not. Agile quite often reveals the problem, and it doesn't give you a solution. It says, okay, you have to do these steps. You realize that that doesn't work, but at least now you know it doesn't work. So, and it gives you something to think about. Agile, it's different processes, different frameworks. It has specific mindset or like values, things kind of guidelines what you do, not exactly specifically what you do. And this helps you, but still you have to do a lot of things around and look around and see, okay, what works for a team, what works in your company. They also have like best practices, like specific things you can do. And to do all of that, you don't have to be a manager or somebody. Like you can just come up to work and you just propose better ideas of how to do specific things. And like I said, it not necessarily solves problems, but it reveals them. There's a thing called Agile Manifesto. It's just a set of very, very core values where everything built around them. And number one is individuals in interaction over processes and tools. Because traditionally, people think, okay, like we have a specific way of doing this thing, and we're going to stick to it because it works. Where Agile, it looks, okay, these are people, this is how they interact, like that is what actually matters more. If we can make them interact in a better way, it actually going to work better. And if we can give them better tools and come up with better processes, we do it because it actually improves interaction between people. This is one of very core values. Another thing, work in software, when you can replace software with anything you do. It can be absolutely anything. It can be UX, design, it can be car manufacturing, like coffee making. Over comprehensive documentation, because sometimes when you don't have a lot of feedback from customer, you're trying to give them manual so they can figure it out. Instead, Agile insists in a lot of, you just have to make working thing and figure out what doesn't work and improve it, instead of trying to basically cover it with better documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. It talks about always being connected to customer, listening to them, rather than just doing something and, like, again, giving them like manual and say, okay, figure it out. And number four, responding to change over following a plan. And probably this is like my personal favorite because it gives you an essence. And it gives you perspective of what is the difference. Maybe you had a plan to do a car, but now you make a bike, and maybe it actually works better, depending, like, you saw how your product behaves on the market, how people like it, and you might change your plans. It's all right. Like if you can deliver changes fast to the market, it's all okay, and it actually valued much more. It's much more important to respond to changes and respond to them fast than follow some plan that you had initially because, well, I had a plan, now I kind of have emotional attachment to that, I cannot give it up. This is like not a good thing. And before I tell you anything else about actually like what you do and how these business processes are implemented, we're going to play a game so you will have better perspective. It's an idea about what you're doing. I wanted to do this before I wanted to talk about specifics because there are different processes. There's called XP, Extreme Programming, Kanban, Scrum, SAFe, I think. There are lots of different ways to implement different Agile, like this Agile Manifesto and all its values can be implemented in different ways. The way I do, and I trained in, it's called Scrum. The biggest difference between it can be applicable to some businesses, but not the others. The big difference, there's always, you know how much work you have to do. For example, it doesn't work well for IT because you always have like support tickets and your workload may be not like the same during the year or even like during the work week. So for example, it doesn't work for IT. But for things like software development, it usually works pretty well because you know, okay, these are the features we have to do and we can plan them out. So if you can more or less plan out your work, usually it works. If it's something like ad hoc, like serving coffee, it's not gonna work well for you. Who knows what that word even means? Any ideas? Well, it's pretty simple. A bunch of very sweaty and hairy guys pushing each other. It's a rugby term. Basically, that's what they decided to call the process. I mean, I don't know. I have mixed feeling about those guys. I like it. You like them? Like I'm not really into big, hairy, sweaty guys, but some of you are, so it's okay. So I don't know how it relates to the process, like, but that's the thing. So you start with planning. You prepare what you're about to do, and usually you commit to do those things for some period of time. I recommend 2 weeks. So you plan what you're going to do next 2 weeks. There's also a thing called retro or retrospective. When you give yourself feedback about what happened last time, you kind of can incorporate that into preparation and training. And basically, once you prepared and did retro, you pretty much have a pretty good plan of what you're about to do next 2 weeks. Then you start doing the work, whatever is your work, and then you make stuff, and then you finish. Finish is pretty tricky. It's a framework. It doesn't tell you specific things. For example, like what it means it's finished. If my team is finished, but let's say I wrote application, but it's not tested yet, is it finished? Or there's another team who has their own Scrum process who's going to take it and go through this loop and finish it. So I'll go back to it, but finishing is like a very vague term here, what it actually means. Usually it means like personally for you, like once you're done and you can pick up some other task, that's when you're done. So when you finish, depends, you can ship this product to market to some other team, give it to somebody. And you kind of go in those loops, and you can think, okay, like if we're talking about software development, and I'm UX person, like where I'm here, right? So the thing is, there's a lot of things that go into preparation and happens in parallel. For example, like if company is small and there's like development team and a UX person or designer, like you work with them, but you kind of work ahead of them and thinking, okay, what they're gonna do during the next iteration. And people who prepare the iterations, you need to think about a lot of things, like feedback, like what do we hear from customers? Can we take something and really quickly implement it next time? You need to understand company strategy, okay, what we globally going for. There's design, there's UX, there's software architecture. So all of that can happen in parallel. It can happen in a different team who delivers their results and gives it to this, for example, development team, and before they prepare. The key moment here is when you go to prepare phase, you should never be blocked by anyone. At this point, you should already have enough material for your team to go through this whole iteration and execute everything you have. And this is a very critical thing, probably for any process, but specifically for Scrum, they just tell you never ever start something where you don't have enough material or information. If you're saying, okay, I can do this, but I'll need to go talk to that guy first. Like, that never goes into your iteration. Iterations called sprints. It's basically the whole cycle called sprint. And before you start sprint, like you already should know what you're about to do, and you should not depend on anybody else. So all people you depend on you should already have everything from them at the point of preparation. And by the time I finish, you should have all the things you can give to the next team to work on. You had a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk for a minute about your thoughts on how mature and buttoned up UX deliverables should be as you go from grooming to sprint planning.
Yeah.
And then during the development cycle for a given sprint, how the UX resource should be engaging with the team.
Okay, there was a bunch of terms because some people know Scrum. I try to avoid terms because I don't want to overwhelm you and use as many normal English words as possible. So grooming and preparation is pretty much the same thing. My answer, like the question is pretty much, okay, how well, or like all the information and all the materials your team gonna work with, how well they should be prepared. And I think it's up to business. Like I go with very vague explanation of what needs to be done. And it can be like, it may be not even finished design. Like if there's like we already have application and we already have design UI guidelines. So if somebody can just quickly put together like a mock-up how this thing should look and behave, developers can really easily figure out how exactly it should look because we have whole pattern library already and they just follow what already exists. So it really depends on the situation. I usually I can put really vague description if I know developers will understand what I mean because they're familiar with the product, they know what's going on, they kind of couple sentences, they know what to do. So if it's not the case, you do need to explain a lot of what exactly needs to be done. Another word you said was story. So basically, story is a specific way of putting requirements together. It's called user story because it explains functionality from user path perspective. So you can say it's like features or tasks, you can name it in any way. User story is just a specific way of defining them from user perspective. And that's what usually used in Scrum, like saying, like writing out things in a specific way. And how detailed you want it to be is about like how long you work together, how mature is your team, how is good interactions in your company. So really depends. And also, like I'm the person who is responsible for architecture for the most time, and like I'm available for developers all the time if they have extra questions. So I would rather put some like brief description, and if somebody don't get it, they can quickly talk to me. Sometimes it's not the case. Sometimes architect works in a different team and you have to schedule a meeting before you get his answer. So in this case, probably before you even start sprint, you want to go and make sure that they lay out all the technical details before you give it to developers. So it heavily depends on what's going on in the company.
So you just took away the track. Nailed it.
So that's the thing that I said finishing. You want to have very good definition of what done means because what often happens like, well, I'm done with my work, so I don't care. But there are other team in your, there are other people in your team, maybe they need to test your work or verify it. And the thing is actually not done. There's another person you have to do it. So you need to be very careful with this. One of the reasons is because it takes 90% of time to do 90% of work. The rest 10% takes another 90% of time. So it is true, like when people say done, they sometimes don't realize like how many things are there. In software, usually developers don't realize how much testing is going to happen, and maybe there are going to be issues found, they will get it back, they will have to change things. Same thing like with visual design, somebody doesn't like it, wants to make changes, it goes back. So this is true, this is like perception of what it takes is really different from reality. And this is why you should have very good definition, okay, what it means if this task is done. And then you realize, okay, even after you're done, like there are other people working on this, so you start coming up, okay, what it means done, because my team is done, but those other teams, they also have to take my work and do something else with this. And then, okay, there's another team who actually delivers product to production. So, like, if your team is done, it doesn't mean there's actually this thing on the market or in production. Like, and you have to have very good definition what it means for just everybody's sake. And also, most likely, you will use some kind of project management software where you have to put checkboxes and say, like, and that's why you need to know, like, okay, if you say it's good to go, like what it actually means. So completely up to you how you define them, but you have to have very strong written down definition what it means. It's a hard problem. Our best people work on this, and this guy doesn't like it, but nobody solved it so far. Basically, that's, maybe you heard that no plan survives first encounter with reality. I found a really good picture explaining that, like the difference between your plan and the reality. There are some things when people sometimes don't realize that. Then they're like second stage, they start to realize that, and now they're scared. It looks pretty scary. So what people do, they start to do some things that I consider wrong. And number one, preparing stories too much. Like you said, how well defined it should be. Like sometimes it's too much. Sometimes people scared, okay, won't be understood properly, somebody gonna go back to me, ask me questions, what is that I wrote down here, and they try to overcompensate for that. Sometimes, like especially if team works together for a very long time, they pretty much like really fast understanding what's going on. So, and it takes more time to talk about things than actually do them. So it basically doesn't make any sense. Estimating too much. I'll go into estimating, but basically you have to understand how much work you have. And again, like it might seem, okay, maybe we should talk a little bit more to have very better understanding what we're about to do and how much time it's going to take. And like I've been in situations when we talked longer trying to understand how long it's going to take than actually somebody would go and do it. So some things are really easy, 5 minutes. Doesn't make sense to talk for 10 minutes about them. So this is kind of things to always keep in mind and kind of have balance. Okay, what is too much, what is too little. Now, estimates. This is, I will tell you with all my experience, this is absolutely true. It's always like this. So you need to be very careful with what you estimate and how. And Scrum and Agile are really good doing this. And the reason when you have a feature in front of you, a story or task, whatever you call it, you sit with a team and you give it points. And you might ask, okay, what is points? And I like saying, like, points is like parrot, right? This is parrot, this is points. And you might ask, like, what I'm talking about. The reason for this is because points is very, very abstract thing. Usually you think, oh, it will take me 1 day to do. And it's very dangerous practice to think like this. We can come up with something else, like chicken. So I like how they look into each other's eyes. Points, the point here is they are very abstract. If it takes me to eat a chicken and I can eat it in 2 days, maybe you can eat it in 1 or 3. It's same size chicken, we just eat at different pace, right? This is why, like, you need to think about the size of thing you're gonna make, because different people will work at different pace, depending how much experience you have, what your other responsibility. And this is, but points are universal. You say, okay, this is the feature, we want to paint this button in red, all right? Like, that's the thing, you have to have idea of what it means and how big it is, and give it some number regardless of who is going to do it. Maybe somebody will do it in 5 minutes, somebody in 1, somebody in 10. Your team have to agree and give it a number regardless of that, which is tricky. It takes time to team to get like a little bit perception, how you point things. But this is really key. Like, doing this will get you really far, because the next thing way more dangerous, called velocity. So your team makes all that work. It estimates how much work it will take, how big are the stories. It spends 2 weeks doing this, and in the end, you sum it up, and you have velocity, right? And velocity is basically what this picture talks about, right? If you want to estimate, let's say we're doing bike from scratch. If you know how fast your team works and basically team velocity, like how much work you can do in 2 weeks, you can estimate how much time it will take for you to make whole bike. You just divide, if it takes, if we do a specific amount of points every sprint and the whole bike take this amount of points, we divide it and we take, okay, it will take 1 year, right? And this is what actually goes and communicated to the rest of the company, and now everybody starts to rely on it. Go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about the different schools of thought about what points are measuring? So some people think about effort, and then other people think about value delivered to users. And then both of those, depending on which point measure you're using, it impacts how you think about velocity.
Yeah. So, like, I would go with any measure. That's why I like parrots. Parrots mean the size. Like, it's a chicken. Chicken has a size. I would not measure what value chicken has for somebody. Like I won't measure for my team, not for customer, because we do the work, and I want these parameters to identify what my team can do or I can do instead of how much value, because value is a whole different thing. I can do one thing in 5 minutes that has value of 100, or I spend 3 days and will do something that has value of 1. So the value delivered to users, I think, can be measured. I don't think how it helps to estimate how fast we can move for the team. It helps you to understand what value you bring for customers or what value you bring to business. But I would go with anything that helps you to understand how fast your team works rather than what it means for a customer.
And what about maybe time versus complexity?
Yeah, always avoid time.
Just chickens and t-shirts.
Yeah, time is absolutely deprecated. Like, never think about time because it's really bad. It's going to get you in a lot of troubles, especially around holidays when people are out, like nobody in the office. Like, it doesn't matter. But same amount of points. Like, chicken is still same size, but now like everybody on vacation, so nobody even works on it. So never avoid time. You can think about complexity. It's a good thing, like how complicated this thing to do, like amount of work, how many designs, pages I have to do, how much code I'll have to write, like how complicated it is. Sometimes risk, because if it's something is risky, probably you won't nail it from the first attempt, so it will go to market, you'll start having bugs, complaints, bad feedback, you'll have to redo it. So I would think about risk to some point, depends what you do. So this is basically 3 things I think about. Actual amount of work to do, not time, like the size-wise. Amount of work, how complicated is that, and what are the risks. And it kind of gives me pretty good understanding what number I'm going to assign to a task. And third thing is story sizing. Like, usually you want every task to be more or less the same, because if they are too different, it's too hard to estimate them. Is there, I can say chicken bigger than parrot, right? And if you have 4 or 5 animals, it's going to work. But if I have chicken and airplane, it's a little bit hard to say what is the difference, and it's a little bit hard to eat an airplane for a person. So you kind of need to think, okay, if something looks too big, you can split it in smaller pieces. And then after you estimate it, made your job done, it's retro time. Retro is really tricky. It's when team gives feedback for themselves. And number 1 rule is what happens in retro stays in retro. Retro is not reporting. It's not like, oh, we're telling to management this is what we did. No. Retro is private meeting where you sit with your team and you talk about three things, usually three. There are different ways of doing this. But basically you have to talk about all things that went bad, all things that went good, and all things that we can do better. And this is very sensitive, some people are not going to talk about this, but being in the private situation and knowing these words not going to leave the room, actually going to help your team. If you want to talk about that you do something wrong, you should feel like you can just tell it and you're not going to get yourself into trouble. Retro is usually pretty tricky. You need to develop trust in a team, because if you can do this and you can do it effectively, this is going to improve your team a lot. So number one, you have to figure out how to make people talk. Privacy helps with that. Some guarantees that whatever we talk about here, not going to leave this room. This is feedback for ourselves, and we're going to improve by ourselves. And another thing, make people act immediately. So if something is bad and we don't like it, or something that we can do better, the action should be taken immediately during next iteration. You don't talk about some distant things. Oh, I wish in 1 year we have something. I wish in 1 year we'll have better computers that works faster. You talk about, okay, what we can do right now to be better. Right? And it's very powerful because people can start talking about impossible things when they don't have this feeling of they're the ones who right now are going to go into this. And it doesn't help with make people talk, because now we're going to say something and they say, great idea, now go do this, right? So you kind of have to balance that. You have to create a situation where people are comfortable talking and giving feedback to themselves and to the team. At the same time, they know they're going to be responsible to take an action right away, to improve right away. But these are key points. Takes time to nail it, but if you can do it, regardless of any other process, regardless if you're manager or not, and if you're responsible for team or not, if you can implement just that thing in a team and do it, this is very powerful. All right. Who knows the name of that game? Nobody? It's from Friends.
I don't watch Friends.
It's called Ultimate Fireball. All right. Next thing. Who knows what's written here? Tools. Who said tools? Okay. Good answer. These are tools. So. No, it's just a bunch of tools. And Agile also have a bunch of tools that helps you with all these processes. Number one, it's called storyboard, and it looks like this. You can even do it in Excel. There's software specifically built for that, and you will have to pay money for this. But you can go as simple as just wall with stickers, or Excel spreadsheet, or any spreadsheet at all. So, and you just move whatever you do from one column to another. In this particular example, you have things what to do, you plan them out, then somebody picks them up, put them in progress, then somebody puts them in testing, then it completed, verification, done. And you can make as many of these columns as you want, depending what works for your team and what you try to achieve. This is just a guideline. This is just one example. And they even have done here. But developers done here, right? Then you have testers, then you have maybe more testing. So that's where your definition of done is very helpful. And also, whatever fits your process, how many stages you have, also can be very easily be seen here. And it's just good representation. We don't use any of those. We have software to do this, which actually much simpler. We have 2 columns and extra states for specific tasks. Another thing, it's called backlog and icebox. It's basically over here before it goes into to-do or analysis. It's kind of things like your future plan, what you're going to do in the future. The difference is backlog is what you're actually going to do, and icebox is more like ideas written down, more or less specific. And like for example, we stopped using icebox because it was just a pile of things that we didn't even want to do. So it's useful tool to have perspective of what's about to happen in the nearest future. And at the same time, you need to keep eye on this, and you don't want to be like 100 things you'll never have time to do, because then it's going to be useless. And you also, what helps you with definition of done and like when every stage and how you move things between different stages. You also need to have good definition in a team what it means, like when I can pick it up and stick it somewhere else, like what it actually means. If I'm a developer and I'm saying I'm done, I put it in testing, but somebody tested it, failed, they put it back, so it all should be really well defined in a team. But this thing is very simple, quite helpful. You can do it anytime. You don't need any special software or skill to do it. The important thing here is prioritization. And it kind of comes into backlog. Whatever is in backlog is what you're actually going to do probably during next iteration, right? And how you pick these things is very tricky. It's usually like there's a person like project manager or product manager or somebody in a company who is responsible for actually saying, okay, we're doing this, all right? And that is pretty tricky because it kind of goes into whole like project management area. It's not really like even touching Agile or any processes. Like this is whole thing by itself. The only thing I would like to say is the amount of things you do is limited, right? One time I was asked as an expert a question that sounded pretty much, I have 100 things to do and team that can do 50. How do you prioritize? And the answer is very simple. You remove 50 things, now you have team who can do 50 things, and you have 50 things, and you don't even have a problem anymore. But it's very hard move to do, right? Like you basically have to tell somebody, we're not going to do this 50 things, and there's nothing you can do about this. Like it's very hard. A lot of people have a hard time saying no, and the person who is responsible for what goes in backlog have to say no a lot, because you can have like even 10 times more things that the company wants to do than actually your team is capable of doing. So whoever is that person can be like head of department, can be project manager. There are lots of different roles, but there's always a person who is responsible for this, okay, final decision that what we actually do on like high level. And if you're ever going to be that person, you'll have to say no a lot. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
This is going back to the first exercise we did at the beginning. This is like one of the biggest ways that your product managers are advocating and having your back. They say no to a lot of people so that you don't have to, so that you can be focused on your work. And like to me, that's always an active strategy. Like they have to be so diplomatic and politic in order to shepherd it through all the stakeholders and hurdles and chairs in the middle of the room, so that at the end of the day, you or your engineers can really focus and just say, okay, here's my part, go.
Yeah. That's a whole different topic. I'll talk a little bit about politics because it kind of involved into like things that come into your team. It's kind of outside of Agile. It's just some good observations that I have. Next thing is very important, called teamwork, and I really like this picture. And it says, no matter how hard you try, other people slow you down. So there are a bunch of things about Agile teams and how they're supposed to work. and if they don't, it needs to be fixed, because this is the essence. Like if your team doesn't follow specific rules, it's all going to fall apart, no matter how good your intentions. And number one, they are called daily stand-ups. Basically, once a day, you all meet together and you tell 3 things, like what did you do yesterday, what are you going to do today, and if you have any obstacles. And stand-up is not reporting to your manager. Stand-up for the team, so everybody tells everybody else in the circle these 3 things. And it happens regardless of who is in the room, who is late, and who is not. It just happens, right? Because usually when you try to improve processes, you have a team, and they wait for manager, and they talk to manager what is going on. This is not about this. Teams in Agile, they are like self-dependent. They report to themselves, stand-up is one of things you kind of every day you give like this short report, and it just happens. Like we do it at 9, it happens at 9 no matter where you are. If you're driving in a car, you have to call. Like there's no just way around it. It's kind of very good discipline, and you're kind of responsible for your teammates, not for boss, which is pretty cool. Another thing, managers. Managers don't exist in Agile. You can have managers in a company. In a framework, there is no room for a person called manager. There's a team, everybody have different roles, and they all know what to do. There's a sticker, you pick it up, and you move it, and you do your work. So all the management stuff, it's outside of Agile frameworks. Like this is for teams and how to make teams work efficiently. You can have official manager style, it doesn't matter. In Agile team, you have your role, and but you do not report in Agile to some special like person. Like all reporting, all numbers is for yourself. And which leads to next thing called KPI problems. So often some people want to see numbers. Okay, how fast your team works, how fast that person works. And this is really wrong thing to do, because humans, when you make prediction about their behavior, they change their behavior. Like this is a well-known fact. Like I can say some things, and everybody tomorrow are going to run into bank and just withdraw their money in cash, and we're going to collapse economy just because I say things when nothing have to happen. It happens to countries where they predict their value of their money going to go down. Everybody makes bank rush, and it actually collapses economy, even though actually nothing happened over time. Like just somebody predicted that economy going to go down, and it impacts how everybody going to act. And this is the KPI problems, because if you say, okay guys, you need to do 100 points every 2 weeks, your team going to do 100 points every 2 weeks. Like they will find a way, but it doesn't mean they're going to deliver value of 100 points, right? People will always find a way to achieve the goal of expense of actually doing things. And this is why I avoid KPIs as much as possible. In a team, everybody knows who works and how. Like if I do same job as you, I know how good you are. I don't need KPIs, I don't need numbers on you to know how good you are, right? And your manager, if he's a good manager, he doesn't need some numbers to know who is good and who is not. All right, like this doesn't help. You have velocity, which is kind of KPI, kind of metric for a team. But this velocity is to estimate how fast you can do. It's not some goal where we have velocity of 60, and now we have to do 100 for whatever reason. Velocity is just a fact, and you kind of move on with this. It's not some kind of metric you try to push and make better, right? If you want to make your team better, you don't do it with numbers. You actually need to figure out, okay, if we need to learn something, let's learn it, right? If we want to do something efficiently, okay, let's figure out how to do it efficiently. But you don't put number in front of people and say, okay, this is the goal, and we go and going to make this wall like of 100 bricks as fast as possible. It just doesn't work. People cut corners. At the end, you just want high quality work. And when you start putting numbers in front of people, usually it actually works in the opposite way. People go for numbers because maybe their like promotion going to depend on this, or like salary raise, and they will do whatever it takes to hit the number not necessarily to do a good job. And the goal is actually to do a good job. So, and it kind of comes down to also what kind of people you hire. It's very critical. Again, I don't need any numbers to tell that if you're good or bad developer. If I'm a developer, I sit next to you, I see how much code you do, how smart things are, and like if they're wrong, like team members, like who like act maybe like toxic. They don't do a lot of work and makes everybody else lazy. Like it all comes down to like actually how you hire people. Like it's very hard to change people, and you need to develop a lot of skill to hire the right people, or at least to have this feeling of a person. Like even if you go and you work with existing team, you really quickly need to recognize what is going on. Who are those people? Who is a good person? Who is not? And like some people, like they can be good performers, but they can be very toxic for the culture. So it all kind of comes in, and the better your culture, the better everybody feels in a team, the better the results.
I should have asked this at the beginning, but can you just give us like kind of a brief history of Agile, like where it came from exactly?
I think
I feel like a lot of stuff we're talking about, like there's kind of a psychological component to it.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, and like, I don't know a lot about the history.
I don't think there is a history. I think it came from different companies. I never read about history of Agile. From what I know, all these random ideas came from very different places. Like, I think Toyota is one of the biggest places that a lot of ideas that Toyota implemented, like in the 80s, they got their way into Agile. But I know there are other companies that basically different companies experimented with different processes and which resulted in like this whole idea how you can make things faster and more efficient. So I think it has multiple sources and not like one person came up with that. And it's constantly changing. Some things I talk about in this like psychological things that just things that make processes in a company overall better. Like not even like they don't have to fit into a specific framework. Like no matter what process you use, like these are helpful things. So, and it came from different sources, different books, some of that just experience and experimentation.
Max, you really hit the core thing when you talked about the manifesto earlier.
Yeah.
So that actually dropped in 2001. And so what's happened is since then, the fundamentals of Agile have changed. And it kind of felt down like fire. Like it was based on other stuff, but it just came. There was waterfall, Agile came along, people started adopting it. But the history is not really important. It's more about it's evolved to suit different environments. That's more like the history of Agile. Is Agile meets corporate, Agile meets startup, Agile meets whatever. So that's more of the history of Agile. Is how it's been tailored.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, thanks. All right, game time. This one, what we're going to do individual estimations. So on every table, you can take your marker and you can draw a little dog, and we're going to estimate dogs. All right. Like you don't need to draw a dog, but the idea is you write down the breed and you give it a number. All right. And then you come up with another breed, and you can do, let's do like how many breeds of dogs you can name. Estimate it. Okay, come up as many as possible and give them numbers of how big they are. Okay. And you write it down.
When you say numbers of how big they are,
Yeah. Well, you have to come up with number. It's just it's that kind of exercise. You have to come up. You name a breed, and you say how big it is, and you name another one, and you come up together with another number how big it is. If it's bigger than that one, it's obviously bigger, or if it's smaller. But you basically have to give it abstract measures
Okay, like, okay.
Can be up to you. Like you decide how you measure. The point of exercise, you have to, as a team, come up with number you assign to size. Yeah. Like 5 to 10 is usually good. Difference for business. How Agile makes it different for business compared to traditional project management processes. First of all is budget. Traditionally, budget defines what we're going to do. I have $1 million, I want to put it in some project, and I expect to see something in the end, let's say after 1 year. Agile doesn't work like this. You have $1 million and you define who you're going to spend it on and what resources. What are the people, what is the team, what is equipment you need, hardware, software, how much time it will take, and let's say after 1 year, you get something. You don't know what exactly, and this is what makes so hard for many companies to make transition. Like I showed in the beginning, you start with a small thing. You start with a scooter, you put it on the market, you get feedback. So this is mindset. You put your money into resources and they bring you something relatively fast, and then you collect feedback and you repeat that. But the first step is really hard if you want to make transition from traditional thinking that you want some guarantees, even though usually it doesn't work this way. Usually your time that you put for project, your deadline is violated, you overspend, you might not get what you want in the end. The product you was building, maybe you spent too much time on it, more than you expected. All of that happens. And traditional thinking is just feels safe. It doesn't actually guarantees anything. When Agile, because it brings product to the market faster, it actually can be safer to play it this way. Sometimes businesses look at how other companies try to implement Agile and failed. There are obviously bad examples, and that's why sometimes there's hesitation. On the other side, when it's implemented properly, then it actually helps you to handle failures and it helps you to improve faster. And this brings up another very important topic. Usually your parents don't talk to you about it. Also in schools, nobody tells you about it. And I'm not talking about sex. I'm talking about money. Money is the key. That's how business works. Business needs to grow, produce more, return investments. And I don't believe in talking about business processes in isolation and having this ideal world perspective. In reality, company wants results. If you fail to deliver them, you have to learn how to deal with that. This is the reality. And Agile helps with that. It helps to understand how money works, to understand top-level decision-making process, because if you ever have some kind of idea, you want to change your team to the better, you want to change your company, your department to work better together, or you just have product or service idea, you have to pitch it. You have to tell it to somebody so it will be implemented. And money is the key here. You don't talk about how awesome your idea from technical or creative perspective. You talk from perspective how much time, money, people, and any other resources it takes, for how long, and what will be return of those investments. Because these are kind of calculations that are made on high level. always like this. Nobody thinks in terms of how cool this idea based on some kind of engineer or designer or UX person or anyone else thinks. It's all about how we invest and how we get return of those investments. When company makes transitions to agile or just want to improve their processes, this is just one more example how you present the case. You explain how working in iterations using agile processes going to save investments and return more. Another really unpleasant thing for many people, but I think it's truth, it's ugly truth, and it's called political game. In every company, at some level, there's always political game. If somebody tells you, oh, it's small company, everybody nice, there are no political games, it's just not true. You should always understand there is. There are people who have power, there are people who don't want to give up their decisions, there are people who are scared to lose their position, and many other things going on. And to be successful in delivering your ideas, because one day you will want your ideas to be heard, one day you will have more experience, more knowledge, maybe you'll have leadership skills, maybe you will have ambitions to grow in your position. Eventually you're gonna run into it, and the earlier you learn it, the better. Political games is a reality, and besides understanding the money, you should also understand how the power works, because that's how your ideas can be implemented in reality, and this is pretty much the language you can talk to top management. If you can understand that, you can make huge progress. Whether it's your career or you just want to improve processes, introduce some agile process, introduce anything else, any kind of improvements. Understanding how money work and how political game work can get you really, really far. I had another idea for a game, but we didn't have enough time. So the game, I called it The Boat. Basically, I draw a boat, and as a customer, I start to ask for different features, and people who should play gatekeepers. They should tell me if they're going to introduce this feature or not, and why. And my goal actually to propose as ridiculous features as possible, so they will have to learn how to say no. Because in real world, there's always a gatekeeper. There's always a person who needs to pay attention to processes, who needs to pay attention to product features, product strategy, and what makes and makes no sense to implement. But we didn't have enough time, so I decided to skip it and go into one more very important topic. And in order to company to work very well, it's not just good processes. There are other things that matters and probably even matters more. And number one is people. People is number one most important thing. If you don't have right people in a company, nothing going to help you. No great process is going to help you if people don't want to work, hate each other, don't talk with each other, lazy, toxic. It never works. And it's very important for people who hire to have that feeling of a person, have good hiring processes to hire qualified people, but also have a feeling what kind of person it is. Look, you're gonna spend most of your life with them. Besides being at home and sleeping, you are at work. And I think people usually don't understand how important it is. They think, oh, just coworkers, it's just work. It's huge amount of time you spend with those people. So why don't you hire somebody who you actually really want to be together? It's not about how smart they are or how fit they are. It's like it's, do you want to spend a whole day with that person? Maybe they don't know enough for a position, but they're more appealing to it personally. And I would always make this choice for a person who I like more personally as a human being rather than professional. And the big reason for this is because if you lack of knowledge, you can always learn it. But if you don't have right personality qualities that would fit the team and the company, it's not fixable. You cannot change the person. Number two important thing, again, it's not the processes, it is culture. All people, the whole company, how everything works together, how people like talking to each other, what fun stuff you have going on. This is very important, the whole environment. And only then, on top of that, you need to have great processes. Because if you have good people, but you have toxic culture, they won't work there. If you don't have right people, culture not going to help you because nobody will want to make an effort to do something good for each other. You need to have right people, right culture in the company, and on top of that, you need to put good processes. And only then it works properly together. If you're missing one of those, it doesn't work well. Another related thing I wanted to mention is you, in all of that in a company, you need to think how you can be helpful. It's not about your career growth or processes or even culture. It's about you there to help company, not company there to help you. This is a big topic, and I want you to think a little bit about this because it really changes your perspective, and it actually a big aspect of a great culture where people want to contribute rather than look what's in there for them and how a company can help them. Okay, in summary, I talked about concepts of agile methodologies. We went through details using Scrum as an example and what it means and how it's implemented. And I also touched multiple topics beyond Agile, just overall about company processes, how business works, and what's important for successful business. All right, it's a question time, and before we go into questions, I wanted to mention this very important thing that there are no stupid questions, and there's a funny example of that. And I'll tell you, it's important because even me recently, there was lunar eclipse, and I was thinking about this, like why lunar and solar eclipse doesn't happen on the same day, because a day you have moon, and then in 12 hours moon goes behind the earth, and it should be lunar eclipse. And I googled that, and I realized that my understanding of that completely false. It takes 14 days to moon to go on the other side of the earth, not just 12 hours. And from any person who knows astronomy, including myself, right now I understand it probably was stupid, but it was not, because it made me thinking and searching and then getting deeper understanding. So questions are important not because they can be smart, it just helps you to talk out your ideas and get others' perspective on that. So it doesn't matter how smart or hard it is, it's about you helping yourself to think through something, just talking it out in a form of question. One of the questions I remember, and it's a very good one, at one point you need to understand how money works in business and how play political games. At what point you need to know it. And basically my answer that I quickly came up with is at the point you get ambitious. If you're sitting and doing your little thing as engineer, designer, UX,
secretary, whatever. If you're sitting there and doing a little thing and you don't have any ambitions, you obviously don't need this. But once you start thinking like, I can do better, I can make myself better, I can make myself grow professionally, I can make this team grow professionally, I can make this company grow, that's when you need it. Because you have to start to think in different terms and play different game. That's it. I'm Maxim Sundikov, Vice President of Technology at Winmo, and I have Instagram account. It has nothing to do with anything I'm teaching. It's just a bunch of beautiful pictures, and since I have this opportunity, I just wanted to put it there. There are a bunch of photos from travel, adventures, extreme sports, and a lot of other fun stuff. Thank you.